Hello everyone and welcome back to Hood Reads. I am of course Michaela and thank you for joining me today. This video is going to be a little different than normal. I'm kind of squeezing it in here. I'm house sitting for some family, or farm sitting, should I say. So if you guys hear like roosters in the background or dogs running around, I just figured I'd film outside because it's so beautiful out, but the lighting is a bit harsh. So I do apologize for that and just roll with me, okay? Because I don't know when I would get another chance to do this video. So it turns out I haven't gotten to do a wrap-up video for you guys since March, which really shouldn't be that surprising considering the route that my year has gone on since then. It's been crazy for sure, and I've mostly just been doing a couple of book reviews here and there of new releases. Of course, you can find those on my channel, and I'll probably throw the links down in the description. But because of that, you guys have not gotten to hear about a lot of what I've read. I've actually read 49 books since I last updated in March. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of them in this video because otherwise it would be stupid long and it's already going to be longer than I would like. So I'm just going to kind of run through a lot of the major ones, a lot of the series that I finished or books that I just really loved, to kind of catch you guys up on what I've been doing since March. It is now the beginning of October, the start of spooky season, and there's going to be a lot of stuff I want to make videos for at the end of the year, of course, all those sort of end of the year videos, and I just wanted to go ahead and update you before that happened. So in April, I finally got to read Sorrowland by River Solomon. That means I have got kind of caught up a little bit with River Solomon's writing, which I've been wanting to do for years. I read The Deep back in March, and then I finally got around to Sorrowland, which I really enjoyed, but it was quite different than what I had originally expected. It kind of, the cover gives off fantasy vibes, but it really turned out to be more like a sci-fi-ish kind of deal. I mean, it's hard for me to categorize it that way because it is such a sort of genre bending, and River Solomon in general is just such a genre bending writer that I don't want to, pin them in, but it did give me more sci-fi vibes than it did fantasy vibes. I did really end up enjoying it, though I can imagine the writing isn't for everyone. The writing style wasn't necessarily my favorite, I will say that, but I thought that the story ended up being totally worth it. I also got to complete the Wayfarers series by Becky Chambers this year. So in April, I ended up reading A Record of a Spaceborne Few, which is book 3, and then I moved right along into The Galaxy and the Ground Within, and I ended up loving that one a lot. It's my second favorite one in the series, probably. I think A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is still holding that #1 spot for that series for me, but I ended up liking the last book, book 4, way more than the other two. So at the end of the day, the more I think about it, my tier for that series is A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, The Galaxy and the Ground Within, A Close and Common Orbit, and then last, A Record of a Spaceborne Few is probably my least favorite. Of course, I love the entire series. I don't dislike any of those books. I enjoyed them all, but just kind of, I definitely liked some more than others and just connected with it a little bit more, and Record of a Spaceborne Few was the only one that I felt a little passive about. I enjoyed it, I liked it, but I didn't go totally over the moon for it like I did pretty much every other book in the series. So I did finally wrap that up. I love Becky Chambers, of course. I also read A Prayer for the Crowned Shy over the summer. It came out in June. That would be the sequel to her Monk and Robot novella, and it delivered on all levels. It was just as good as the first book, I thought, just sort of expanding what was going on with the monk and the robot and their friendship, and just sort of this journey of self-discovery, really, that they're going on together. So I'm going to be reading anything by Becky Chambers. She's a total auto-buy author for me from now on. It's been that way for a while, really, pretty much since I read the first Wayfarer book, and that hasn't changed. I don't know what's going to be coming next for her. I don't know how many books are going to be in the Monk and Robot novella series, but I'm in all the way on Becky Chambers. I'll read whatever she writes. Also this year, back in March, I started the Lady Trent series with A Natural History of Dragons. That is by Marie Brennan, and I actually have finished that series. I finished it even before summer started, I think. And that series has come to mean a whole hell of a lot to me. It really helped me get through a hard time that I had this year and my move that I had this year, and sort of turned into almost a comfort read. The audiobooks in particular were really well done, and I just found them very easy and comfortable and comforting to consume. I would fall asleep listening to them at night, which is not something I normally do. I can't normally fall asleep if there's something like a TV or whatever or audiobook going on in the background. But I was just in such a bad place mentally that I really needed some sort of comfort and to not feel alone. And those audiobooks really worked for me with this series, the Lady Trent series. I flew through them, and they were fantastic. So I read A Natural History of Dragons, I believe, in March, and then I just kind of knocked the books out from there. I didn't read them all back to back, but I kind of did like one a month until June when I finally finished it. It's just a great series, honestly. It's sort of unique. It's a fantasy series, but it does lean in a sort of historical fiction direction, just because it takes place in this sort of Victorian England-esque world, where really the biggest difference between that world and our own Victorian English history is the names, of course, but more so it's just that dragons exist, which is the biggest fantasy common denominator, right? It's a world very similar to our own in Victorian England, but with dragons, and it's awesome. It's just got these really great Indiana Jones sort of vibes, this very adventurous sort of adventure movie thing that I loved when I was a kid and haven't really discovered that I like books about that sort of thing. And I think this series helped open me up to that a little bit, because I definitely was craving more of this sort of adventurous archaeologist or, sort of scientist vibe. I just thought it went in a lot of really great directions. All of the books in the series aren't created equal. I definitely like some of them more than others. The first one is a really great introduction, but the story, like the plot of it, not great. How I think overall, like the third and the fifth books were probably my favorite. Just because of the sort of plot direction that they go in. And in the third book, I believe, you're introduced to sort of the main love interest of the series. You don't meet them until book 3, because this isn't a romantic series. The romance isn't the main plot. If anything, it's more like a C plot. But I really like that character, and I really like their character dynamic with the main character and the romance. So I think that's part of why I ended up liking book 3 so much, is because we finally got to this character that I ended up really enjoying throughout the series. It's also worth mentioning that I got to read the companion novel to the Lady Trent series. I say companion novel because it is a little bit of a continuation, but it takes place a significant time after the end of that last book in the Lady Trent series, and it is about a different main character, Lady Trent's granddaughter. That is called Turning Darkness into Light. I got to read it in June. I also really enjoyed that one. To be honest, I would read a whole nother series about that character as well, if that's something Marie Brennan was considering doing, continuing on with that. I like it as a companion, sort of almost like an epilogue novel to the Lady Trent series, but I feel like the main character for it and sort of the way the world has changed in between those two series stands really well on its own, and it's something I would be interested in continuing to read. Like I said, these books just became such a comfort thing for me this year that I can't imagine me just turning my nose up at anything involving that world at all. And next, when I finally got settled after my move, summer was in full swing. It was hot out here, you guys. So I live in Georgia in the U.S., and it is hot in the summer. Like, nobody is playing around, right? The sun just came to slay. So in the middle of summer, I discovered this series. It's called the Sarah Brewhall series by A.J. Pitts. And it is a sort of urban, like a lesbian, urban fantasy sword and sorcery series from the mid 2000s, like 2012 or 2013. And I found it at my local used bookstore, and I eat it up. It is like exactly what I needed. It's not amazing, right? It's not like the storytelling and the writing. It's not amazing, but it's that perfect sort of older, 2000s urban fantasy thing that I crave and that I just really enjoyed, especially when I was younger. So again, I'm coming at this series from a place of this was just really comforting for me, and it was just kind of hitting everything that I needed at that time. The first book is called Black Blue Blade. Second book is called The Honeyed Words, and I'm actually kind of in the middle of the third book. I have been for a little while. I got slightly burnt out. But I do want to finish the series. I really enjoyed it. It's written by a man. And I won't say that all of the the lesbian representation is like spot on, but it's good enough for me, right? Because I'm having fun. So the main character is this. It's like modern day urban fantasy. So the main character is this blacksmith, and she does on the side a lot of props and sort of stuff for this movie, or for a small indie film company, right? And they make cheesy sci-fi films. So she does a lot of the prop work and lends out a lot of her own personal weapons collection to these movies. And she's just trying to live her life. She's barely making ends meet when all this sort of crazy stuff pops off. She has in her possession an actual like legendary sword. It's not Excalibur per se, but think Excalibur. Like this sword is old, it is magical, it is dangerous, and lots of people want it, right? Total MacGuffin. So this turns her whole world upside down, and she discovers that there are like dragons that exist, and they sort of control the world in human form, and they're usually like CEOs or politicians or something else equally awful like that. And I really ate it up. That was in June that I kind of started devouring those. I haven't finished the series yet. I believe there are 5 books. But I enjoyed it. It was a fun time. I'm gonna keep reading it, when I have time. And I just thought I'd mention that one because it really made an impact on me in June. I also read Under Fortunate Stars, and I believe that is by Ren Hutchings? Yeah, Ren Hutchings. And that was a new release this year. It's a sci-fi, timey-wimey, little bit of space opera thrown in there. And I'm not going to call it a queer space opera because it's not, romance isn't the main part of the book, but there are several queer characters, and this is sort of a sort of queer normalized universe that they're living in. So there are several queer characters that are mentioned specifically, but a lot of the times it's just generally normalized queerness in this world. So I'm gonna be honest, Under Fortunate Stars was almost entirely a cover buy. The cover is absolutely gorgeous. I can put it on the screen for you guys so you can take a look. I knew it had some queer elements, and of course I love space operas, so I thought, why not? This cover is gorgeous. I gotta try this, right? And I did enjoy it. I want to be clear about that. I really enjoyed the book. It has a lot of timey-wimey stuff going on. I'd say it's more a time travel story than it is anything else. So there's not a whole lot of fighting, not a whole lot of action-centric stuff to the story, the way that you might expect from a space opera. But there is some timey-wimey, like mystery, space stuff. And I really like the direction that the story took, and just sort of this weird alternate history that's trying to be prevented in it. It's neat, but it's probably not going to be what you expected just reading the summary, or just going into it. Don't expect it to be some grand space opera adventure, because it's much more contained and isolated than that. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that most of the book takes place within this sort of pocket dimension. Yeah, that's what I want to call it. It takes place in a pocket dimension. So even though there is this wider sort of space opera galaxy out there, most of the book takes place in the self-contained pocket dimension on a spaceship. There is a large cast of characters though, so there is a lot to discover, and I really ended up liking it. I just would say go in expecting it to be different, right? Different than what you would expect. And it's different than anything else I had read this year and any other space opera I had read. So I do recommend that one. It lives up to the hype that cover kind of brings up, but it does defy expectations. I had back-to-back queer lesbian space operas. So I read Seven Mercies, which is of course the sequel to Seven Devils, and I really liked that one. I fell in love with Seven Devils last, I think, November. I had gone into it thinking that it was YA because the cover, or at least the American cover, is very YA looking, but it's not. I want to be clear that Seven Devils is an adult, sci-fi book, or you could call it new adult. The characters are fairly young, but the content is quite adult. So you've got, sexual content, you've got a lot of violence, you've got language, but more importantly, you have a lot of queer representation in this series. And that's expanded even more so in the sequel, Seven Mercies. One of the characters from the original cast sort of working through, in like a C plot, but they're working through some gender identity stuff and working on probably transitioning to a more neutral pronoun, gender neutral pronoun. So that's something that's happening. So you also have lesbian characters, bi characters, and it's just generally very exciting series. I don't know if this second book is like the last one. I don't know if it's supposed to just be a duology, but I would continue reading if they wanted to write more. The ending of it, it's not a cliffhanger for sure, and it does wrap it up pretty well, but I feel like there's a lot of room there left open to come back and see what these characters are up to in some sort of different capacity in the future. So I read Seven Mercies, and then right on the tail end of that, I tried Gear Breakers finally. Gear Breakers is a YA kind of sci-fi dystopian book, and it has Asian representation, which is always exciting. It's on of all the lists for the Asian Appreciation Month, which I think is May. But I finally got to read it, and I gotta be honest, I didn't love it. So I had to read it on audiobook, and I don't know if that was part of why I didn't like it as much as I wanted to. I didn't hate it. I want to be clear on that. I didn't hate it. There was so much hype because I've been hearing about this book for, I don't know, it feels like 2 years now maybe. And it wasn't hitting all the notes for me. And one of the audio narrators, I'm pretty sure it's two different narrators because it's a dual POV. One of them had a voice that just was not working for me, right? That happens sometimes with audiobooks. It's unfortunate. But it can be sort of grating if you don't like the narrator's voice for some reason, and it can kind of, I don't want to say mess up, but it can definitely alter your reading experience, and that's what happened with me with Gear Breakers. I didn't dislike it by any means, I just didn't love it the way that I had hoped to, and the way that I saw other people on BookTube were enjoying it. I will probably try the sequel at some point, but I would really rather read it in a physical copy, see if maybe that helps at all. Because I just had a hard time connecting with it, and connecting with the characters too, but I did make it through Gear Breakers, so that makes the list. This next one was a little bit of a sidebar read for me. I've been mood reading pretty much all year, right? So nothing specific. I kind of abandoned making TBRs for most of the year after March. This next one was Fate of Stars, and I don't even know who the author is. I'll have to put it on the screen for you. It was an audiobook that I found on Scribd. It's about this sort of... It's about this really, it's a fantasy romance, sapphic fantasy romance, get that out there. And it's about this really brutal princess. Picture like a Prince Eric type of princess, but if she were awful, right? Who captures and drags a mermaid out of the sea and takes her home to her like evil queen mother as this sort of prize trophy and bargaining chip, and keeps her as a prisoner and torments her. Yeah. However, this turns into, of course, like a mermaid princess sapphic romance. There's more to the princess than meets the eye. There are extenuating circumstances, and they fall in love. Yeah. I'm not gonna say that this book was like out of this world or revolutionary or anything. It's very tropey. Especially the prose, like the way that it's written is very tropey. But I enjoyed it nonetheless. It's sort of like, sometimes you just want something that's what you see is what you get, right? And that's what I needed at the time, and that's what I got. That's what this book brought. It brought this, prisoner, captor relationship and this princess mermaid vibe. And it's actually the first book in a trilogy, and I fully intend on reading the rest of the books. I enjoyed it. I don't know what to say. I liked it. I finally got to read Foundry Side. I have had the first book in Foundry Side. I don't know what the series is called, but the first book is called Foundry Side, and I've had that since Christmas. But I just now got to read it. Well, I say just now. I got to read it in August, and I ended up really liking it. So that is a fantasy series. I believe it's a trilogy, and it does have a sapphic main character and a sapphic relationship. Though I will say, at least in the first book, the sapphic relationship is definitely on the back burner. There's a lot happening in this book, a lot of world building going on, and the plot is pretty fast paced as well. So the characters have a lot of, especially the main character, has a lot of other things to worry about than just relationships or romance. So there is a romance. It's slow, and not much happens in that first book with it. Just sort of the setup. You can see the setup coming. So I don't have much to say about the relationship portion of the book, but I will say that I really enjoyed the world building for Foundry Side. I think it's so unique and just like very different in terms of the magic system from anything I've read. Now, I'm not extremely versed in a lot of the sort of bigger, more popular fantasy series. So, like Brandon Sanderson, who I know everyone says is amazing at world building and amazing at, magic systems. I haven't read much of him, but I will say that Foundry Side is just different from anything I've encountered so far. The magic system is sort of based on imbuing inanimate objects with a sentience, and more importantly, with a purpose. So you can make these objects work independently towards some sort of goal, like a door that will not open for anyone except for the person that set this spell, right? Or like a wagon that doesn't need horses because the wheels just know where to go on their own. So you can imagine this sort of magic has a million possibilities, and the book tries to explore all of those, and I imagine the whole series is just going to keep exploring them further. So my main thought is that I just really enjoyed it. I'm excited to see where the sapphic romance goes, but more importantly, I'm super interested in the overall plot of this book and just what the implications of that first book have to do with the overall world. Because this world is totally built on this magic system. It's reliant on it. It's super intricate, and the book really digs into that. You can tell that the author spent so much time, like meticulously thinking about this magic system and the way that it would affect the world and the sort of world that would result from having access to this kind of magic. And I just really appreciate that attention to detail and like this really deep thought process when it comes to the world building. I think it's really well done, and I finished Foundry Side and immediately before I had even totally finished the book, I already went ahead and ordered book 2 and 3, which is Shorefall and Lachlan's, I believe. So I ordered those. I have them. They're sitting on my bedside table, and I cannot wait to finish that series. I can't say for sure when it'll happen, but I'm itching to read Shorefall right now, just because it left me wanting more. I also went ahead and picked up Soul Taken by Patricia Briggs. I got the audiobook the day that it came out. I think I might have pre-ordered it. So if you don't know about Patricia Briggs, she is a very prolific urban fantasy writer. I don't know how long she's been writing, since the 90s at least, I think. And I have been obsessed with her Mercedes Thompson series since I was a kid. It's like one of the first urban fantasy series I read. It's on book, I believe Soul Taken is book 13 is what I want to say, but I could be wrong. It might be 14. It's been going on for a long time. I've been reading it since I was in, I believe, 8th grade. So even though it's not queer, it's not exactly what I read now. I'm still obsessed with it, and I still keep up with it and read the newest releases as often as I can. Typically she comes out with one new book a year, and so the Mercies Thomas series is usually one book every other year, and Soul Taken was the newest one in it. I read it pretty quickly. They're fairly short usually. But I blew through Soul Taken. It was another great Mercy Thomas adventure. It wasn't groundbreaking. I gotta say the last few books in the series have been not a letdown, but just a little underwhelming for me. I feel like nothing really big has happened in the series in a long time. And, a lot of that has to do with the way that Mercy's life has gone. And she's like, her romance has sort of been resolved. She's getting older. She's happily married. Like, a lot of the bigger series conflicts have already been taken care of. So each book now is just sort of this one-off incident or this one-off problem that they have to deal with. And that makes for a little bit less dramatic tension than I think was happening in some of the earlier books, and that's just bound to happen when you have a series go on this long. And I have to say, I'm wondering, even though I love this series and even though I enjoyed this book, I'm wondering how long Briggs plans to keep writing this series, or like what plans she has for it in the long term and sort of in the bigger scope of things. But I did read Soul Taken, caught up on that. Next, I finally read Bluebird. And I can't remember who the author is right now. I'll have to put it on the screen for you. But I did finally read Bluebird, which I believe was a new release from this year, 2022. It's a sapphic space opera deal, And I had pretty high hopes for it just because sapphic space opera, like those are trigger words for me. You know, those are I'm after all of that pretty much, especially after Seven Devils, which I mentioned earlier. I read that last year sometime in the fall and really loved it. Also, You Sexy Thing I read last year in the fall and really liked, which is a queer space opera. So I was just really looking forward to Bluebird, and honestly, it was okay. Right? It got the job done, but there wasn't really anything that made it stand out for me. It wasn't unique. It's just sort of, and I know this is unfair to say when I'm like, I'll take any sapphic space operas, right? And that's exactly what Bluebird is. That's exactly what it delivered. But there was nothing that set it apart. There was nothing that made it unique. It was just kind of cut and paste. Here is a sci-fi space opera story. You kind of know exactly the beats it's going to hit. You kind of know exactly the archetypes that the characters are going to follow, and there aren't going to be any major surprises. And that's pretty much all I can say. I enjoyed it, but it was a little bit of a letdown. I think my expectations were a little bit too high, and maybe that's my bad. But honestly, I didn't dislike the world, even though it was kind of a cut and paste, you know, space opera world. I did find that I enjoyed it, and there were certain aspects of it. The main love interest in that series is a librarian, and libraries in this world are apparently a pretty big deal. They kind of act as like this, not a government body, but they're overseen by the government, and they're considered very sacred, almost to a religious extent. And I found that aspect very interesting. I will say, if anything was going to like set it apart or make me want to know more, it would be to do with the libraries and the librarian in particular. I really liked that character. I would like to read more of that. So if the author did want to do something with this and maybe continue it into a universe or a series, I think focusing on that aspect of the world and maybe expanding on that a little bit could be a really interesting route to go. And of course, in September, I finally read The Oleander Sword by Tasha Shuri. And that, of course, is the second book in the Burning Kingdom. Is it a saga? Is it a trilogy? I'm not sure. It's the sequel to The Jasmine Throne, which came out last year and was part of the Sapphic Trifecta of 2021. I gotta say, I'm a huge fan of this whole one book every year thing that the authors have been doing a lot lately. The Jasmine Throne is accomplishing that, and for such a big, like, elaborate, really just great fantasy book, I can't believe that she's popping these out one year after the other. I have to assume that maybe she had, you know, both books or the majority of the books written already before the Jasmine Throne even came out. Because I mean, I guess Brandon Sanderson does it, so I don't know, but like, I can't imagine someone writing this much, this well in such a small amount of time. But the Oleander Sword was devastating. It was so good, you guys. If you haven't read it already, you gotta go get that. You gotta get it. It was so good. I really should just dedicate a whole video to it, but I don't know when I'll have time for that. I have a lot of thoughts, that's for sure, because so much happens in this book, and it's delicious. Like, it's so good. The ending is just, it would have destroyed me. Like, it should have destroyed me. I don't know how I'm still standing here right now speaking to you after reading the end of The Oleander Sword. I want to keep things as spoiler-free as possible, so I don't want to say too much, but I will just say that we get so much of the main couple of that series in this book, Melina and Priya. We get so much of them getting to spend actual time together, which of course they were together a lot in the first book, but I think the ending of the first book kind of leads you to believe that they won't see each other for a while, or that we won't be seeing them together or get to see them, you know, interact at all for a lot of the second book, and I was pleasantly surprised to discover that that wasn't the case at all. We get so much of them, and it's such good stuff. I love it. I loved the book. It is just so well written. I love the story. I love the world building, and I'm just super impressed by the author, by Tasha Shuri. And I can't wait to read her backlog, because she's been writing. She has other books. I'm not totally sure if her other books are adult or YA, but I'm gonna have to read them anyway because she's fantastic, right? She's doing such an amazing job that I can't convince myself to ignore her past works. So yeah, a fantastic sequel, a fantastic series. I can't wait to see where it goes. I don't know if we're going to be getting the third book next year or not, but maybe, because she's writing them. She's writing them, and she's writing them really well. After that, I read Escaping Exodus, and I also read The Blood Trials. Did finally get around to these two. So Escaping Exodus is a really weird sci-fi book, and it is adult. I want to be clear about that. It's new adult or adult. The characters in it are younger, sort of like late teens, but the content, I would say, is pretty firmly adult language, sexuality, those sort of things. And this is by Nikki Drayden. So I read Nikki Drayden's earlier book, A Prey of Gods, earlier this year, and loved it. It was fantastic, so it's an African modern sort of sci-fi, near future sci-fi, I guess is what you call it, and I really loved that back in February. So I was looking forward to Escaping Exodus. I read it on audiobook, and I gotta say I did not like it as much as Prey of the Gods, but I didn't dislike it either. It was just weird. So it's sapphic. It's about these people, like this society, who are in space, and they live within these space creatures. I kind of picture them like whales. They call them space beasts. They're huge, like a creature so large that an entire society can live within it, like within its body. It gives me some Osmosis Jones vibes, which is not a thing that I enjoy, but that's sort of what you're looking at. And a lot of this book is about, it's a political situation where one of the main characters is the heir to the throne, so the heir to the leadership of this society, and she's being prepared for that. There's a lot of political stuff that she has to deal with, and her best friend slash love interest is of a different class, so she's from a lower working class, and a lot of this book has to do with the way that they live within the beasts and the things they have to do to make living inside this creature inhabitable, right? And it's messed up. It's really messed up, and it's gross. So because they're living inside of something else's body, there's a lot of gross language, a lot of gross imagery to do with like body horror or just like blood and gore. I think I saw another reviewer refer to this as something that people who liked The Stars Are Legion by Cameron Hurley would enjoy, and I do agree with that. When I heard someone say that, I was like, oh, that's why I'm not enjoying this. There is a book called The Stars Are Legion by Cameron Hurley, and that is the only book I've read by the author, and I hated it. I wrote a really long ranting review on Goodreads about it. I read the whole thing, and I don't know how I made it through that book because I really disliked it, but I did finish it. And this book, Escaping Exodus, even though I didn't dislike it the same way that I disliked Stars Are Legion, it has a lot of the similar language where it's just kind of gross to read. And it's not that I'm against grossness, but I'm definitely not in favor of grossness either. So I will say that about Escaping Exodus. You'll have to give it a try yourself. It's a really interesting story, great representation, but not my favorite. Just not my favorite. That's all I can say. After Escaping Exodus, I read The Blood Trials, which is a new release from this year. Again, we have a book that I thought was YA fantasy, but it is not. It is adult fantasy or new adult fantasy. So the age of the characters is sort of a new adult range. I don't know how old they are exactly, but I would guess that they're around 19, 20, 21, because they've just come out of this sort of military academy, and the whole plot of the book is that they're going through these trials to become like the most elite military soldiers that this world has to offer. I guess it's sort of like the equivalent of like the Marines sort of thing, but like think of it in terms of a fantasy context where that's just taken to the next level, right? And so there's definitely adult content here. There's adult language. There's a ton of violence and sexual content as well. So definitely not young adult, just for anyone like me who goes into it just based off the cover, sort of expecting something to be YA. And I really like The Blood Trials. I'm going to be honest, I was on the fence about it at first. It took it a while to really draw me in and sort of make me care. But by the end of the book, I was in it, right? There are parts of this book that I think the pacing could have been done better. This is a problem that I have with the Poppy War as well, where it's like, this book, it's called The Blood Trials, and you expect it to be about the blood trials. And it is, for like for the majority of it. More than half is about the blood trials, and then I guess what I would expect and what I still kind of want is for the book to end when the blood trials end, like for that to sort of be the climax, and then however that goes to just, they graduate or they don't graduate or they die or whatever. Something like at the end of the blood trials should be where this book ends, but instead it keeps going. And there's a whole like quarter of the book after that about the war that starts afterwards. And because of that, the pacing feels a little weird to me. I don't love it. It's like I felt like there was a contained story, and then we're already getting into book 2, even though book 1's not over yet. And that happened with the Poppy War for me as well, where it's like they're at this military school, and I expect them to go through the military school, and it's probably when they graduate that the book is going to end, around that same time. But instead, the book just keeps going and going until after they've graduated and they're already fighting the war and everything like that. And it's something about that pacing, or just the structure of that narrative, that I don't enjoy. It just feels to me like book 2 is encroaching on book 1, and I don't want that. However, I did really enjoy the blood trials. It is not queer. I went into it thinking that it was for some reason, and therefore I was a little bit disappointed, but it is extremely heterosexual. However, I don't fault it for that. I do like the romantic B-plot that's happening. I don't love it, but I like it. It's doing it. And I have to say that it was steamy, despite being not queer. The love scenes between the main character and her love interest are exciting, if nothing else. So. Alright, we're rounding on the end here, guys. So in September, I got to read Silver Under Nightfall. This was a book that I had originally planned to read in October as part of like spooky season, but again, I'm just going with the flow with this year, just mood reading. So Silver Under Nightfall came out in September, and I snatched it up like the day it came out. I got the audiobook on Scribd. I was super excited to get it, and I didn't know what to expect. It was a little bit of anticipation from the cover, because the cover is absolutely gorgeous and just amazing. The cover art kind of made me think originally that it was maybe a graphic novel, just because of the style of the art, but it's not. It is a whole book, and it's fantastic. So it is, how to explain? It is a queer, Castlevania-esque vampire fantasy world. Yes. So a vampire hunter, polyamorous, queer romance, right? I haven't seen a lot of Castlevania. I can't seem to get past the first season, which is super boring. Everybody says that the second season is where things really kick off and it becomes amazing, but I haven't been able to get there yet. However, I definitely see how this is very Castlevania-esque, just the world, because it's a fantasy world that is very aristocratic, there's a lot of aristocracy and like nobles and whatnot, but also vampires exist and are kind of a normal part of this society. They a little bit have their own sort of separate society and their separate government body and their separate nobility, but they are interacting with the human world on a regular basis. But they're also this sort of league of vampire hunters. I believe they're called Reapers. And our main character, Remy, he is a Reaper. But he's a little bit of an outlier, a little bit of an outcast, because some drama went down with his mom, and basically there's just a rumor that he is like half vampire, even though that is not true. He is not half vampire. But because of some stuff that happened when his mom was pregnant with him, people just have this negative association with him where they act like he's not quite human, or that he's dirty or a traitor or something, right? Despite that, he is a fantastic Reaper. He's like one of the best Reapers of his age, which is appropriate because his father was like this really famous vampire hunter. And So I won't get into all the court politics of it, but basically he ends up working together with this vampire lord and vampire lady to solve this mystery of vampires are being turned and kind of going crazy in a way that's not normal for them. They're being more like feral, kind of wild animals when they get turned. And this disease is obviously causing havoc in the kingdom and really messing up the human-vampire relations because the crazy vampires are killing humans. So, conflict there. And so he teams up with this couple to solve this mystery and like figure out why this is happening and try to stop it. And polyamorous, delicious vampire hunter romance vibes ensue. This book was pretty much everything that I wanted it to be. It was everything that I expected, and I just felt like it's so rare for a book to deliver on all of its promises, right? And this book does that. So any promises that you get from the cover or the vibes or the synopsis, any of that, it's just going to live up to it. And it's very rare that you can say that. I loved it. I think it's great, and I hope that it gets the recognition that it deserves, because I haven't heard anybody else talking about it, and I just don't know how anyone's ignoring this cover. This book is amazing, and the cover tells you so. Alright, one more, last but not least, and we'll finally be caught up. Nona the Ninth by Tamsin Muir is, of course, book 3 in the Locked Tomb saga. I just finished Nona this week, and as usual with Tamsin Muir, I am both confused and exhilarated, right? So I don't want to go through my entire journey with the Locked Tomb, but basically, I like this series, but it makes me feel stupid. Because, like, I go online and, like, the rest of the fandom makes me feel like I have no idea what's going on. They're all going nuts and popping off with, like, fan theories, and they're dissecting the text and, trying to figure out where all the clues are and what this is a reference to and what did this really mean. And it's just a whole lot of analysis, and I'm just smart enough to understand what has happened at the end of each book. I'm just barely passing this test, right? However, despite how convoluted and confusing and crazy these books are, I find myself enjoying them nonetheless. My favorite of the first 3 so far was Harrow the Ninth, which I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by just because Harrow the Ninth is perhaps the one that is the most confusing, or the most disorienting at least, because of the writing style. A large portion of that second book takes place in second person perspective, which I normally hate and which most people normally hate, but I thought it was such an amazing feat of storytelling, just an amazing narrative device that Tamsin Muir just knew how to wield perfectly. That being said, I didn't like Nona the Ninth as much as I liked Harrow the Ninth, just because, I'm not gonna lie, I'm here for the vibes, but I'm also here for Harrow and Gideon, right? I love Gideon, of course, just as a character, and I love them as a dynamic. Whether you like them as a romantic couple or not, it doesn't really have to be up for debate, because I think whether their relationship is romantic in nature or sexual in nature is sort of irrelevant. Just their dynamic and this connection that they have is irresistible and fascinating, and that's what I'm here for. And while you do get some of that in Nona the Ninth, I was left wanting more. Like, the whole book, I'm like, okay, when are we going to get to Harrow and Gideon? When are we going to get to Harrow and Gideon? And then we don't. I don't know if that's a spoiler, but we don't get to see Harrow and Gideon reunite in this book. I don't feel like that should be that big of a spoiler. They don't get to reunite, and that sucks. So I hoped that would happen, even if it was just a little bit, in this book. But we don't get that. So I have to say that I didn't find the book disappointing, but at the end of it, I was disappointed because now I have to wait. I'm not sure how long, hopefully next year Alecto the Ninth will come out. And I'm sure that we'll get something then. That's supposed to be the end of this, saga or whatever it is, this series at least. So I'm thinking we'll get some sort of definite conclusion, but I don't know what that'll look like, and I don't want to wait anymore for it. I wanted at least a little something in Nona the Ninth, and I didn't get it. However, Nona is still part of the Locked Tomb. It's still amazing. the writing style is there, the humor is there, this intricate, kind of crazy, trippy storytelling is still there. So I think anyone that has enjoyed the Locked Tomb so far is going to enjoy Nona. I enjoyed it, but you know, don't go into it expecting there to be some great Gideon and Harrow reunion, because there just isn't, right? So it's another book in the Locked Tomb. It's another, you know, home run. But it is definitely not my favorite. So far, Harrow the Ninth is still my favorite, and I like Gideon the Ninth, and then Nona's gonna go third, and we'll see what Alecto does next year. Alright you guys, this video is so long and I'm sorry about that. This has just been sort of an update on my reading this year because I haven't gotten to do a wrap up in a really long time. I'm just gonna call it a wrap up. That is a bunch of books that I felt like I needed to mention that I have gotten to read this year. It's only a few of the 49 that I read total. And we're going to be going into spooky season here soon. I'm still riding a mood reading train, so I don't know that it's going to be a whole lot of spooky books this year. Anyway, that's the wrap up. Just a little update on what I've been reading all year where I've been a little absent. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm going to let you guys go. Goodbye.